The blizzard hits Harlow Creek, Montana at 2 in the morning on December 15, 1903, and Marta Solberg is asleep, not huddled by a stove, not burning through her last cord of wood, not praying that the walls hold just, asleep warm, breathing slow under a buffalo robe, in a structure that has not groaned once since the wind came up while outside the temperature drops. 60-mile-per-hour gale turns the Beartooth Valley into something you would not survive for 20 minutes. She wakes once she lies still and listens. She can hear the storm, that high screaming note she has known since childhood in Norway. But she can hear it the way you hear rain, distant, contained. She feels very faintly a vibration in the packed earth beneath her cot. That is all. She pulls the robe to her chin and goes back to sleep. Across the valley, August Fenn is not sleeping. August Fenn, who owns the finest timber frame house, who 6 weeks ago stood at Marta's fence and called her building project a mud hut and told everyone that grief had finished the widow's mind. August Fenn is feeding his stove for the 4th time since midnight. He is burning a quarter cord of wood in a single night, and he cannot get the interior above 38 degrees. His pipes are starting to freeze. August Fenn's wife is sleeping in her heavy coat, a thick wool shawl layered over her shivering frame. Rolf Dahlen, Marta's nearest neighbor, has already lost his primary stove to a jagged, cracked firebox. He has moved his family, 3 children, the youngest not yet 5, to the freezing barn. They are alive because the animals are alive, but they are not warm. The Petersson family, 2 miles west, is dealing with a collapsed roof section, 12 feet of sod, ceiling down, cold pouring through the hole. Like water, they will make the quarter-mile walk in the dark in 50-mile wind in -31 degrees. With 3 children under 10, they will make it, but barely, and in the middle of all of this, Marta Solberg is asleep in an oval room of dirt. The temperature inside that room is 51 degrees Fahrenheit, 51 degrees inside, no fire burning, -31. Outside, 82 degrees of difference from one side of a wall to the other. This is not a story about luck. This is not a story about a good winter. This is a story about a woman who understood something that the rest of the valley did not, and who built that understanding into 32 inches of tamped clay and gravel and barbed wire, 1 grain sack at a time, while her neighbors stood at the fence and laughed. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is where the laughing starts, and you need to hear the laughing to understand what the silence at the end means. It is the 22nd of September, 1903, and Marta Solberg is filling sacks, not flour sacks, not potato sacks, long tubes of burlap 4 feet long, a foot across, stuffed tight with a mixture of wet clay and gravel and coarse sand. She fills one, drags it to the trench she has dug in a rough oval behind the cabin, lays it flat, and tamps it down with a wooden mallet. She shaped herself, then she goes back and fills another one. Her hands are raw, the frost from the night before still furs the north side of the fence posts. August Fenn sees it first. He is riding past on the road and stops his horse, and he stares for 30 seconds because what he is looking at does not fit any category. Then he cups his hands. Marta, he calls, what in thunder are you building? Marta doesn't look up a house. She says. August looks at the trench, at the oval of tamped dirt bags, at the woman with the mallet out of mud. He says, you're building a house out of mud and old grain sacks. Marta sets another bag, tamps it flat. Woman, August says, mud hut will melt in the spring thaw or freeze solid come January and crack apart like a walnut. Either way, you'll have nothing but a ring of burst dirt. He shakes his head at the man beside him. Rolf Dahlen, she got worse after Christopher passed. August says, not lowering his voice. Grief does things to a person. Marta hears this. She picks up another sack. Rolf Dahlen rides up to the fence himself later that week. He looks at the walls, 2 courses up, now 8 inches out of the ground. Marta, Christopher would have talked you out of this. You know that a sensible woman builds with timber, builds with stone, not with. Marta looks up. Christopher, she says quietly, died cold. I do not intend to. Rolf Dahlen rides back down the lane, and then there is Henrik Pearsson's mother, who tells everyone at the store. She tells anyone who will listen that she is worried about the widow. She hired Henrik for 3 days of digging and hauling. The boy came home smelling of clay and talking about barbed wire. Woman alone builds things that don't have names. There is trouble now. Let me tell you who Marta Solberg actually is, because she is not crazy, she is not grieving, she is not improvising. She is the daughter of a builder from Telemark, Norway, who built the same way his father built, who built the same way his father's father built, earthen walls, packed into organic fiber courses, no nails, no timber. Frame relying entirely on the extraordinary insulating capacity of dense, moist earth. This knowledge is old enough that no one in Telemark could tell you its origin. It is older than the timber frame. Houses her neighbors consider traditional. It is older than the state of Montana. It is older, arguably, than most of the ideas anyone in Harlow Creek has ever had. Marta brought this knowledge to Montana when she came over 18 years ago, and Christopher, who was a good man and a practical one, said, "Build with timber, build like the others, build." The neighbors will not understand earthbags. The neighbors' understanding matters here because this is not Norway, and we are new, and we cannot afford to be strange, so they built with timber just like the neighbors did, and every winter Marta watched. The cold seeped back, and she watched Christopher pile more wood on the fire, and she watched the woodpile shrink, disappearing into the cold. She kept her father's knowledge folded in her mind. Christopher died in the winter of 1900, and one Marta sat at the kitchen table and ran the numbers. 43 cords of wood burned in 5 winters. The timber operations had stripped the surrounding slopes. The winter of 1901 had taken $9.60. She had $41 left in the old coffee tin. The bank held a note for $212. She could not afford to stay cold. She could not afford another winter like the last one, and she was 52 years old and alone on a 40-acre homestead at the edge of a valley, where the wind came off the Beartooth Plateau like something with a personal grievance, and she had exactly one asset that no one around her had. She knew how to build a wall that the cold could not get through. She opened the journal, she sharpened the pencil, she began to plan. The structure Marta designs over the winter and into spring is not complicated, but it is precise, and the precision is everything. She chooses a site 30 feet south of the existing cabin, south-facing for solar gain, backed against a low earthen bank. She designs an oval, because an oval has no corners for wind to lever against. She calculates the wall thickness, 32 inches at the base, tapering to 28. 32 inches of packed clay gravel sand has an insulating value that no timber frame wall matches. Marta's walls, when complete and dry, will give her somewhere north of R30. The math is not complicated. The math is devastating. She spends the spring collecting materials with the patience and method of someone who has been planning this build for 180 burlap grain sacks, triplet-stitched at the seams with waxed twine, saved over 3 years at the rate of however many she could acquire from grain merchants. 19 wagon loads of fill material mixed in a specific ratio. She has calculated 2 parts native clay subsoil, 1 part fine gravel, 1 part coarse sand, dampened to the consistency of stiff bread dough. Too wet, and it shrinks; too dry, and it won't bond. She tests it between her palms every morning before she commits to a mix. The way a baker tests dough: 3 salvaged strands of barbed wire from a collapsed fence on the back of the property. These will be laid flat between every course of bags. The way a mason uses rebar in concrete, bonding the courses against any tendency to slide or shift. 8 lodgepole pines felled on the back slope, peeled, and aging through winter in the barn, drying to the specific lightness that tells Marta they are ready for roof, framing a 4-foot granite lintel stone, roughly dressed. Sledded in from the creek 2 wooden window bucks. She builds herself on a rainy afternoon in early September a double-glazed window assembly. 2 panes of salvaged glass set in a frame which will cut the heat loss through the south window by roughly half. The first course of bags goes into the trench in the last week of September. This course is filled with pure gravel, not the clay mix. It sits below grade. Its only job is drainage, to ensure that ground moisture never wicks up. Marta calls this the root course. Without it, the walls above would slowly absorb moisture, lose their insulating value, and eventually fail. With it, the walls stay dry and dense. Each subsequent course is the clay gravel sand mixture, tamped hard with the pine bro mallet until the bag is rigid as adobe brick. Before the next course goes on, bags staggered in alternating pattern. No vertical joint running continuous through 2 courses, same as brickwork, because a continuous joint is a crack waiting to open. Barbed wire laid flat between each course, pressed down into the bags, 4 inches per course, fully compacted. 8 courses to reach 32 inches. The math is slow, and the work is slower. The first setback comes in October. 3 nights of hard rain followed by a hard freeze. The work site ices over. The clay mix in the staging area goes beyond workable. 2 Saturated too fluid Marta loses 4 days she. Does not if she sits at the kitchen table. The drafts coming through in thin, cold ribbons, she looks at the first snow sky. And she does the calculation she's been avoiding she cannot finish before. The snowfall working alone she goes to see Lena is 61, a widow with a strong back, and no patience for other people's opinions. Marta lays out the proposition, 12 days of work, 12 meals. And 1 quart of seasoned birch. Lena Haverford shows up the next morning with her own tamping board, and her boots already laced. The 2 women work through October and into November in near silence. The most efficient way, the walls rise, the oval closes in on itself. The fortress of earth begins to take form. The borrowed lintel stone goes up over the doorway on a Tuesday evening in late October using rope and wheel block system rigged from a temporary frame of lashed poles, a technique Marta's father taught her for managing impossible weights with limited labor when it seats true and level. Lena says, "Your father was a clever man." Marta says he was a practical one in telemark. This means the same thing. The second setback is August Fenn, but not in the way you might expect August rides past the work site on a Thursday in the second week of November when the walls are chest-high and the roof framing has finally begun, and he delivers his considered professional judgment to the men gathered outside. His store no proper footing below frost line. He says that wall is going to heave, the whole oval shifts and cracks, and she'll have nothing but a ring of burst bags. This assessment spreads through Harlow Creek with the speed that bad news always travels. It reaches Marta's ears within 2 days, and she sets her jaw and says nothing because August Fenn is not entirely wrong about frost heave as a general phenomenon. He simply does not know about the 2-foot gravel base layer she installed, which provides exactly the drainage that prevents the ice lens formation that causes heave, and she does not wish to explain this to August Fenn in the road, but she hears the doubt spreading. And on the worst nights, she feels the beginning of her own when the temperature drops to single digits before dawn and her back aches from the tamping. She picks up the journal. She reads the calculations. The calculations do not doubt. The roof goes on in the last days of November. 8 lodgepole rafters notched into the walls. Over the rafters, a dense mat of cattail reeds gathered from the creek in October. Over the reeds, tar paper, salvaged from the old cabin, overlapped 12 inches at each seam. Over the paper, 8 inches of clay sand mixture. The total weight approximately 48 tons of earth. It holds heat the way a stone holds the warmth of the sun. The principle is simple and ancient. The neighbors cannot see it working, so they do not believe. The small iron stove goes into the south corner. The flue is sealed tight with clay. The south-facing double-glazed window is hung the thick planked door is fitted and swings true. Marta sweeps the packet earth floor. She lays down layers of braided rag rugs on November 22nd. She fires the stove for the first time. She uses 6 pounds of split birch. She holds her husband's brass thermometer. Interior, 29 degrees, outside 14. It rises to 4 to 7 degrees in 40 minutes. She adds 2 more pounds of wood. The temperature reaches 53 degrees, outside 14 degrees, inside 53. On 8 pounds of wood, total 39 degrees of difference. From 6 pounds of birch, less than you'd use to cook a single meal. She writes the number in the journal. She does not celebrate. She extinguishes the stove, goes to the old cabin, and lies awake for a while in the particular quality of calm that comes from having done a thing exactly right. Then she sleeps. The sky over the Beartooth changes color on the afternoon of December 14th, that particular shade of yellow-gray along the northwest horizon. Old-timers call it the wolf sky. The temperature drops 12 degrees in 2 hours between 3 and 5. The air goes still in the way that air goes still before something serious arrives. Marta sees it at dusk and does what she has been planning for 2 weeks. She moves her 2 milk cows and 3 chickens into the old timber cabin. Fresh bedding, stove, loaded days' worth of split wood inside. The animals will keep each other warm, and the cabin will not freeze solid. And in the morning she will still have milk and eggs more than her neighbors. She carries everything she needs into the earth house: preserved vegetables in heavy ceramic crocks, dried beans, the coffee tin with its $11 Christopher's Bible, the small Norwegian journal. She fills the 50-gallon water barrel and wrestles it through the low doorway. She stacks 70 pounds of split birch along the north wall. She checks the flue draw. Clean and strong, she closes the thick planked door. She lights a fire, brings the room to 50 degrees, and goes To bed outside the thermometer on the barn post. Reads -14, the wind is building. She sleeps, the blizzard arrives in full at 2 in the morning. You know she wakes once, listens to the storm. From inside, 32 inches of earth, feels the faint vibration in the floor like a rumor of what is happening. Let me tell you what everyone else experiences on December 15th. The temperature is -31 degrees. The wind is 55 miles per hour. The killing temperature -6 to 5 degrees. Exposed flesh freezes. In 4 minutes, a horse left standing wet in the open will be dead. In 10, August Fenn wakes at 5 in the morning to a kitchen that is 36 degrees. And falling, he builds the fire up to what he considers a heroic level. Within an hour, he has brought the room to 41 degrees. Then, the fire begins to consume the wood faster than the room holds the heat, because the cold is getting through the walls. Through every micro gap in the siding, there is no mass in those walls to slow it, no stored earth memory. There is just the fire and the cold, and the fire losing by noon. August has burned a quarter cord, and his interior temperature is 38 degrees. His wife is wearing her coat and her shawl over the coat. His water pipes freeze in the north wall at approximately 2 in the afternoon. He wraps them in hot rags until the hot water runs out, and then he prays. Rolf Dahlen loses his stove to the cracked firebox at 11:30 the night before. The sound it makes, a deep percussive crack, as the iron splits, wakes his wife. By the time Rolf understands, the room temperature is already falling, and the wind is a scream. He bundles them into everything warm and moves them to the barn, carrying the youngest. They will spend 2 nights in the barn with the animals. The older children will have chest coughs by January. The Petersson roof goes at some point in the second night. A 12-foot section of sod ceiling. It comes down with a sound she later describes as the earth deciding it has had enough. It misses the sleeping area by 8 feet. Cold pours through the hole like water. They have no choice. And they know it. Lars Petersson takes his wife and children. He walks the quarter-mile to the Haverford place in the dark, in the wind. They are all inside and accounted for within 22 minutes, close to the edge. Astrid Petersson will not talk about those 22 minutes for the rest of her life. And in the earth house, in the oval room of packed clay and gravel, Marta Solberg fires her morning stove. 8 pounds of birch. The interior temperature before the fire is 41 degrees. A 9-degree drop, 9 degrees of drift over an entire night in -31 temperatures. That is what 32 inches of Earthbag wall accomplishes in the dark. After the first fire, the interior rises to 51 degrees and holds for 4 hours. After the second fire, it reaches 55 at the peak of the storm in the middle of the second afternoon, the worst hours when the temperature outside is -35. The interior is 55 degrees Fahrenheit outside, -35, inside 55, 90 degrees of difference. Marta writes this in the journal. Outside air temperature -35 degrees Fahrenheit, inside air temperature 55 degrees differential, 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Then she writes, the walls hold, they hold as father said they would. They hold because the earth does not leak, and the mass does not forget. She eats a bowl of cold bean soup and a heel of bread and reads from the Bible. There is nothing else to do outside. The blizzard is taking apart everything that was built without understanding. Inside, Marta reads and the stove ticks, and the walls hold. The storm breaks on the morning of the third day, revealing a world transformed. Marta opens the door into a valley remade in white, the drifts reaching 9 feet. The sky is a hard, clear, merciless blue, cloudless and cold and beautiful. The silence after 3 days of screaming is total and strange and clean. She stands in the doorway in her coat and her husband's boots and watches. Then she goes inside, fires the morning stove and makes coffee. August Fenn rides over on the second day. After the storm breaking through drifts, August stands at the door of the earth house with his hat in his hands. The roof is carrying 3 feet of snow like it was built to carry it. The walls show not a crack, not a settled course, not a single burst seam. August looks at Marta, standing in the doorway in her shirt sleeves. Your pipes freeze, he says. I have no pipes. She says the walls hold, the walls hold. He looks at the thermometer visible through the doorway, mounted on the interior wall post, easy to read. His eyes stop on the number. He looks at Marta. What does it read? He asks. 51, she says. I haven't fired since this morning. August Fenn is quiet. I burned half my remaining cord last night. He says couldn't get above 40. My wife slept in her coat. Marta pours a second cup of coffee and holds it out to him, and says nothing. He comes inside, and the warm air hits him. 51 degrees in the dead of December. He stops in the doorway and he takes off his coat, because he has to. He stands in the low, clay-smelling space. Then he says quietly, by gum, Rolf Dahlen comes 3 days later with his eldest son, who has a chest cough. He asks if Marta would be willing to explain in detail how she built the walls. She invites them, and she gets out the journal and opens it to the diagrams. She explains the courses, the mixture ratios, the barbed wire bonding, and the gravel base. She explains it without triumph as practical knowledge that belongs to anyone who needs it. Rolf's son leans over the journal and traces the diagrams with finger and asks 3 good questions. How long did it take? Rolf asks, looking around the solid, silent room. 11 weeks of steady work, Marta says, plus hired time for the heavy hauling. Rolf looks at the wall beside him. Christopher never believed this would work, he says quietly. Marta says Christopher believed what he could see. He was a good man that way. But the walls of this place work. Because of what? You cannot see the air inside the mass the way the earth stores what you give it and pays it back slow. You cannot see thermal mass working any more than you can see time. You have to believe in it the way you believe in the turning of the season. She looks at the wall. She has plastered smooth, gone hard as weak stone, now warm to the touch the way stone warms in afternoon sun, and holds that warmth. My father used to say, a wall that takes from you and gives back is a better neighbor. The timber wall takes your wood and gives you nothing but the memory of warmth. The earth wall takes your labor and gives you back every degree. You cannot argue with that accounting. Marta spends the rest of that winter warm, sheltered in her fortress of earth and mass. She burns 6.5 cords of wood over the entire season. Compared to 12, she is warm consistently, and without heroics from November through the end of March. She rises each morning into a room that is between 42 and 48 degrees, and she brings it to the mid-50s with 30 minutes of modest fire. She lives in the kind of comfort that her neighbors find almost offensive. She meets the bank note in March with the $11 in the coffee tin and $4 additional from selling eggs. A sale possible because her chickens laid while every other flock in the valley huddled cold and unproductive in frozen coops. By fall, 4 families are asking Marta for instruction. By the following autumn, 2 new Earthbag structures are under construction. August, Fenn does not build one. His timber frame identity is more durable than his toes. He does on a Thursday in June spend 2 hours watching Marta demonstrate, asking questions that are genuine, and Marta answers them without satisfaction because she is not in the business of having been right. She is in the business of surviving. She is in the business of being warm. There is something worth sitting with at the end of this story. The mockery was consistent. It was confident. It came from people who were not stupid. They saw an oval of grain sacks, and they were utterly wrong about what it was. They evaluated the material and ignored the principle. They saw mud and ignored mass. They saw a widow doing something strange and could not see a 50-year-old calculation. The cold does not care what your neighbors think. The cold is the only judge. The verdict was given on December 15th. These walls hold. That is sufficient. That is everything. Perhaps you are building something that does not have a name. Perhaps someone has stood at your fence and called it mud. Perhaps you have run the numbers in your journal. You are in the long middle where walls prove nothing. Marta would tell you this. Stay in the trench. Fill the next bag. Tamp it flat. Lay the wire. The proof does not come from explaining to the neighbors. The proof comes from December. And December always comes. Build the wall that gives back work through the long November of whatever you are making. And when the storm arrives, you want to be the one asleep feeling nothing but the faint vibration and the warmth. You built. The neighbors will stand in the doorway with their hats in their hands. The warm air will hit them and they will take off their coats, and you won't say a word. You'll just pour the coffee.